Commander Daniel Brooks stepped off the landing craft and felt alien soil beneath his boots for the first time in his life, and the feeling was strange beyond anything he had imagined during the long journey through space. The planet Verath Prime stretched before him, in colors that had no names in any human language, with trees that glowed soft blue and purple, with flowers that opened and closed like breathing creatures, with air that smelled like honey mixed with rain. His team gathered behind him, 5 specialists chosen by Earth Command for this mission that everyone back home called impossible. And Daniel wondered again why they had picked him to lead them. Lieutenant Maria Vega was their xenobiologist, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, who had spent 20 years studying alien life forms from a distance, and now stood trembling with excitement at the chance to see them up close. Sergeant Paul Hendricks carried enough weapons to start a small war. His face, hard and scarred from conflicts on 3 different colony worlds, his eyes always moving and searching for threats. Dr. Caroline West smiled her perfect diplomatic smile, the same smile she had used to negotiate treaties between warring human factions, though Daniel had never trusted that smile completely. Engineer Kevin Liu checked his equipment for the 100th time, nervous and sweating despite the cool alien air, a genius with machines, but terrified of everything else. Corporal Lisa Monroe handled communications, her fingers dancing across her devices as she established connection with their orbiting ship, her face revealing nothing of what she thought or felt. They had come because of a signal, a pattern of sounds and lights that had been broadcasting from this planet for 300 years before humanity ever built its first rocket. Scientists on Earth had studied that signal for decades and concluded it was not natural. Intelligent had created it, that it was an invitation or perhaps a warning. Daniel did not care which it was, because he had nothing left on Earth worth staying for. Nothing except regret and loneliness, and the memory of a daughter who had stopped calling him father years ago. The jungle rose before them like a wall of living light, and Maria pointed toward a gap in the trees, where ancient stones formed an archway covered in symbols that seemed to move when Daniel looked directly at them. "The signal originates from beyond that arch," Lisa said, her voice hushed with wonder and fear combined. Daniel nodded and stepped forward, because that was what commanders did. They stepped forward into the unknown, while others followed, and his team fell into formation behind him. The path through the jungle was easier than expected, as if the plants themselves moved aside to let them pass, as if the planet wanted them to reach whatever awaited at the signal's source. They walked for hours through that glowing forest, past creatures that watched them with too many eyes, past pools of water that reflected stars, even though it was daytime, past trees so old they made Earth's ancient redwoods seem like saplings. Paul kept his weapons ready but found no threats to shoot, and Daniel could see the frustration building in the soldier's eyes, the need for an enemy that refused to appear. Caroline documented everything with her recording devices, narrating observations in her smooth, professional voice, already planning the reports she would file and the fame they would bring her. Kevin jumped at every sound and shadow, his hands shaking as he monitored their equipment, terrified of this alien world, but more terrified of being left behind. Maria wept silently as she walked, overwhelmed by the beauty surrounding them, by the proof that life existed beyond Earth, in forms more wonderful than anyone had dared to dream. Said nothing at all, her face a mask that hid whatever storms raged beneath the surface. And Daniel simply walked, one foot in front of the other, thinking about his daughter Sophie, and wondering if she would be proud of him if he never came back. The ruins appeared suddenly, rising from the jungle like bones from the earth. Towers of black stone, veined with silver, that caught the strange light and threw it back in patterns that hurt to observe. At the center of the ruins stood a temple, and at the heart of that temple they found a chamber filled with warmth, and the smell of something like cinnamon and starlight combined. An egg rested on a pedestal of crystal, an egg the size of a human child, black as space itself, with lines of silver running through it, like frozen lightning, or the last thoughts of dying stars. Daniel approached without meaning to, his feet carrying him forward, while his mind screamed warnings he could not hear. And when he stood before the egg, something cracked. The shell split apart in pieces that dissolved into mist before they touched the ground, and from inside emerged a creature that made Daniel's heart stop and restart in a single terrified beat. It was small, no bigger than a house cat, with a serpentine body covered in scales that shifted between black and silver with every breath it took, with wings that were still wet and folded tight against its sides, with eyes that held depths no newborn creature should possess. Daniel knew what it was, even though he had never believed in such things. Knew it the way dreamers know the shape of their oldest dreams. Knew it because some truths are written in the bones of every thinking being, regardless of what world they call home. It was a dragon. The creature looked at each member of the team in turn, and Daniel watched his people react to that ancient gaze. Paul flinched and stepped back when those eyes found him, his hand going to his weapon. Before falling away in shame, Caroline tried to meet the gaze with her diplomatic smile, but the smile crumbled, and she looked away first, exposed and vulnerable. Kevin dropped to his knees and covered his face, sobbing without sound, unable to bear what those eyes reflected back at him. Lisa simply froze, her mask cracking to reveal terror beneath, the terror of someone with secrets they cannot afford to have known. Maria alone seemed at peace, tears still flowing, but her face calm and accepting of whatever judgment the creature might render. Then those eyes found Daniel, and he felt himself seen in a way he had never been seen before, felt every wall he had built around his heart, examined and found wanting, felt his loneliness and his failures, and his desperate hope that his life might mean something before it ended. The dragon did not speak with sound. The words simply appeared in Daniel's mind, like memories of conversations he had never had. "Garden has been waiting," the dragon said in thoughts that tasted like silver bells. "But the flower will not bloom for the fearful or the proud or the cruel. It blooms only for pure hearts." Daniel tried to respond, but found his voice stolen by wonder and by terror in equal measure. "You have traveled far," the dragon continued, "and you carry much pain. But pain is not impurity, and loneliness is not sin." The creature moved closer, its small body graceful despite its newness, its eyes never leaving Daniel's face. "I am called by a concept your language cannot hold, but you may think of me as whisper of dawn breaking, waiting for someone like you for longer than your species has existed." Daniel finally found his voice, and it came out rough and broken like something long unused. "What do you want from us?" he asked. Whisper tilted its head in a gesture that seemed almost human. "I want to see if your species deserves to survive." Dragon replied, "And you, Daniel Brooks, are the one who will help me decide." Daniel stood frozen as Whisper's words echoed in his mind, unable to understand why a creature older than human civilization would choose him of all people to judge an entire species. He was nobody special, just a tired man with too many regrets and too few accomplishments, a commander chosen for this mission because nobody would miss him if he failed. The dragon seemed to hear his thoughts, because it made a sound like wind chimes laughing in a gentle storm. "That is precisely why you might succeed where others have failed," Whisper said inside his mind. "You carry no hunger for power, no thirst for glory, only a quiet, desperate hope that your existence might matter before it ends. The temple chambers seemed to grow larger around them, walls pulling back to reveal corridors that had not existed moments before, passages lit by crystals that pulsed with soft, welcoming light. "Walk with me," Whisper said, "and I will tell you why you are here and what you must do. If your kind wishes to claim the gift my creators left behind." Daniel followed because he had no other choice, and his team followed him because that was what they had been trained to do, though their faces showed fear and confusion in equal measure. The dragon moved through the corridors with grace that belied its small size, wings still folded, but body flowing like water over stones, leading them deeper into the temple complex. "Long ago," Whisper began, "there existed a species called the Karath, beings who had mastered sciences your people cannot yet imagine, who had learned to fold space like paper and rewrite the laws of physics like children editing their homework. They passed through chambers filled with machines that hummed with quiet power, devices that Kevin stared at with desperate longing, but dared not touch. The Karath believed that intelligence was the universe's way of knowing itself, that every thinking species was precious beyond measure, that life itself was sacred in ways your religions only dimly grasp." Maria nodded as she walked, tears still wet on her cheeks, as if the dragon's words confirmed something she had always believed, but never had proof to support. "So they created gifts," Whisper continued, "treasures hidden on worlds throughout the galaxy, waiting for any species clever enough and worthy enough to find them." The corridor opened into a vast space that took Daniel's breath away, a biodome filled with plants that defied every law of biology he had ever learned, flowers that sang in frequencies just below hearing, trees that moved their branches to track the visitors like curious observers. "This is the Garden of Mercy," Whisper said, "and at its center grows the greatest gift the Karath ever created." Daniel saw it then, rising from the center of the garden like a beacon of impossible beauty, a single flower on a stem of living crystal, with petals that shifted through every color. The human eye could perceive, and many that it could not. "The mercy can heal any wound," Whisper explained, "cure any disease, extend life beyond natural limits, even reverse death itself if applied quickly enough." Paul stepped forward with hunger in his eyes. "Then we take it back to Earth and save everyone." "No," Whisper said, and the word carried weight that made the soldiers stumble backward. "You do not take the mercy. You earn it, or you earn nothing at all." The dragon turned to face the entire group, its small form somehow commanding attention that beings 100 times its size could not have achieved. "The mercy is dangerous in ways your minds can barely comprehend. In the wrong hands, it becomes a weapon capable of unraveling the genetic code of entire species, capable of turning healing into horror, capable of ending worlds." Caroline spoke in her diplomatic voice. "Surely, with proper safeguards and regulations, we could prevent misuse." Made that laughing sound again, but this time it carried sadness instead of amusement. The Karath thought the same. They trusted their own kind to use the mercy wisely, and a faction among them proved that trust misplaced. They weaponized the flower, and the war that followed erased the Karath from existence. The garden seemed to grow darker as the dragon spoke, flowers closing their petals as if mourning a loss that had occurred millions of years before any human drew breath. So the survivors, the last of their kind, created guardians, beings like me, engineered to sense the intentions of those who seek the mercy, to test them, to judge whether they are ready for such power. Daniel understood then, understood with a clarity that cut through his confusion, like light through darkness. "The egg waited for us," he said, "waited until a species reached this planet, then hatched, so you could judge whether we deserve the flower." "Yes," Whisper said, "and many have come before you. Species you will never meet because they failed my test and retreated to their homeworlds empty-handed. Species who sent their warriors and their geniuses and their most ambitious leaders to claim what could not be claimed by force or cleverness or ambition. But your people made a different choice. Perhaps without meaning to, they sent you, a man nobody expected to succeed, a man nobody would mourn if he died, a man with no ambition except to matter. I don't understand, Daniel said, though he was beginning to fear that he did. The test is not about strength or intelligence or cunning, Whisper said. The test is about the heart, about what you carry inside you, about whether you can face yourself honestly and still choose love over fear. The dragon looked at each team member in turn, that ancient gaze, weighing and measuring, in ways no human instrument could replicate. Each of you will be tested. You will enter chambers that show you who you truly are, that strip away every lie you tell yourself, every mask you wear for others, and you will either accept what you see, or you will break. Paul's hand went to his weapon again, but he did not draw it, his face pale with something Daniel had never seen in the hardened soldier before. "And if we refuse?" Caroline asked, her diplomatic mask cracking around the edges. "Then you may leave. The mercy will remain here until another species comes to be tested, and your people will continue dying of diseases that could have been cured, watching loved ones age and wither when they could have been saved." Maria stepped forward, her voice steady, despite the tears that still flowed down her cheeks. "I'll take the test." "You will all take the test," Whisper said, "but only one of you will decide whether humanity passes or fails." Dragon's gaze settled on Daniel with weight that made his knees want to buckle. "Only you, Daniel Brooks, because only you came here carrying nothing but hope, and hope is the seed from which pure hearts grow." The chamber walls shifted again, revealing doorways that had not existed before, 6 openings that pulsed with different colors, as if each was designed for a specific person. "Enter when you are ready," Whisper said, "and remember that the test has already begun, that every moment since you stepped onto this world has been weighed and measured, that there is no way to cheat or deceive what waits within." One by one, Daniel's team approached their doorways, some with determination and some with dread, until only Daniel remained, standing beside the dragon in the vast and beautiful garden. "Why me?" he asked the question that had haunted him since the egg first cracked. Whisper's mental voice carried warmth that felt almost like affection. "You asked that question," the dragon replied, "because you doubt yourself instead of assuming you deserve greatness, because your heart is open in ways that those who seek power can never understand." Daniel looked at his doorway, a simple wooden frame that reminded him painfully of the front door of his childhood home, a door he had walked through for the last time decades ago without ever looking back. "What will I see in there?" he asked. "The truth," Whisper said, "and what you do with that truth will determine the fate of your species." Daniel took a deep breath and stepped forward into the light. Daniel stepped through the wooden doorway and found himself standing in his childhood kitchen, the smell of his mother's cooking filling the air, sunlight streaming through windows that had been broken and boarded up for 30 years in the real world. He knew this was not real, knew it was some kind of illusion or projection created by alien technology beyond his understanding. But his heart did not care about what his mind knew. His mother stood at the stove with her back to him, humming a song she used to sing when he was small, a song about stars and dreamers and children who grew up to touch the sky. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked like glass under pressure. She did not turn around, did not acknowledge his presence, simply continued cooking and humming as if he were a ghost in his own memory. The kitchen dissolved and reformed into another place, a hospital room where his father lay dying, machines beeping their steady countdown toward. Daniel remembered this day, remembered standing in that room, feeling helpless and small, remembered the words he had wanted to say but could not force past the fear that choked his throat. His father's eyes found him, clouded with pain, but still sharp, with the intelligence that had made him a great man, an important man, a man Daniel had spent his whole life trying and failing to impress. "You were never good enough," his father said, and the words cut deeper than any blade could reach. "I waited my whole life for you to become something, and you never did." Daniel wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself, but the truth in those words pinned him in place like a butterfly mounted on a board. The hospital dissolved and became the apartment where his marriage had ended, where his wife Amanda had looked at him with eyes full of disappointment that had long ago replaced whatever love had once lived there. "You were never really here," she said, packing her bags, while Daniel stood frozen in the doorway. "Even when you were home, your mind was somewhere else, always dreaming about stars you would never reach, while I raised our daughter alone." "I tried," Daniel whispered, but the words sounded hollow, even to his own ears. "You tried to escape," Amanda corrected him. "Every mission, every assignment, every chance to leave, you took them all because facing us was harder than facing the void." The apartment dissolved, and Daniel found himself in Sophie's bedroom, his daughter sitting on her bed at 17 years old, the age she had been when he missed her graduation for a mission that had meant nothing. "I waited for you," Sophie said, and her voice carried a hurt that made Daniel want to crumble into dust. "I kept a seat empty next to Mom. I kept looking at the door, thinking you would walk through it at the last minute, like you always promised." "The mission was important," Daniel started to say, but Sophie cut him off with a laugh that held no joy. "The mission was always important. More important than me, more important than Mom, more important than anything, except your own fear of being ordinary." Daniel felt tears streaming down his face, felt his chest tightening with grief he had carried for years, without ever letting himself feel its full weight. "I was afraid," he said, and the admission felt like pulling a knife from his own heart. "I was afraid that if I stayed, you would see that I was nothing special, just a man with no great talents and no great destiny. I thought if I could do something important, then maybe you would have a reason to love me." Sophie watched him with eyes that held the judgment of everything he had ever failed to be. "I already loved you," she said. "I loved you when you were just my dad, before you decided that being my dad was not enough." The bedroom dissolved, and Daniel found himself in darkness, complete and total darkness that pressed against him from every direction, like the weight of every mistake he had ever made. "You ran away," a voice said, and it was his own voice, echoing from the void that surrounded him. "You told yourself you were running towards something, but you were always running away, from your father's disappointment, from your wife's needs, from your daughter's love." "Yes," Daniel said, because there was no point in lying to himself anymore, not here, not now. "You joined the service because it gave you an excuse to leave. You volunteered for dangerous missions because you secretly hoped you would not come back. You accepted this assignment because you thought dying on an alien world would be better than living with your failures." "Yes," Daniel said again, and each admission felt like another piece of armor falling away, leaving him exposed and vulnerable and more honest than he had been in decades. "So what are you?" the voice demanded. "What remains when you strip away the uniforms and the titles and the desperate hope that your life might matter?" Daniel stood in the darkness and searched for an answer, searched through the rubble of everything he had believed about himself, and found something small and wounded, but still breathing, buried beneath the wreckage. "I am a man who wanted to be loved," he said, "and who was too afraid to let himself be loved. I am a father who ran from his daughter because he was terrified she would see him as he truly was." "And what did you truly want?" the voice asked. Daniel thought about Sophie, about the real Sophie waiting somewhere on Earth, probably not even knowing her father was dying on a planet light years away. "I wanted to be there," he said, and the words came flooding out like water through a broken dam. "I wanted to see her grow up. I wanted to hold her when she was scared. I wanted to tell her that she was enough, that she was more than enough, that she was everything." "Then why did you leave?" because I did not believe I was enough, because I thought I had to earn love instead of simply accepting it, because I was broken in ways I did not know how to fix. The darkness began to lift, replaced by a soft golden light that felt like sunrise after the longest night. And now, the voice asked, "What do you want now?" Daniel closed his eyes and let himself feel the truth he had been running from his entire life. "I want to go home," he said. "I want to tell Sophie that I am sorry, that I was wrong, that she was always the most important thing, and I was too scared to see it. I want one more chance to be her father. Even if it means giving up the stars." "The stars were never what I wanted," Daniel said, and he finally understood the truth that had been hiding in plain sight. "I wanted to matter, and I already mattered to her. I just could not see it." The golden light grew brighter, and Daniel felt warmth spreading through his chest, felt something cracking open inside him, felt walls that had stood for decades crumbling into dust. "You have opened your heart," Whisper's voice said in his mind. "Most cannot do what you have done. Most would rather die than admit what you have admitted." Daniel opened his eyes and found himself back in the garden, the crystal flowers singing around him. Whisper coiled at his feet, with something like pride in those ancient eyes. "Did I pass?" Daniel asked. "You began to," the dragon replied. "But the true test is not what you say in the darkness. It is what you do when the light returns, and you must face the consequences of your honesty." Paul emerged from his doorway then, shaking and pale, tears streaming down his scarred face, a broken man who had seen himself clearly for perhaps the first time. One by one the others emerged, Caroline without her mask, Kevin without his excuses, Maria transformed by acceptance. But Lisa's doorway sealed itself, with a sound like a coffin closing, and Whisper shook its head with ancient sadness. "She chose to remain rather than face what she had become," the dragon said. "Some wounds are too deep for truth to heal." Daniel looked at his remaining crew, looked at their broken, beautiful, honest faces, and felt something he had not felt in years. He felt hope. "What happens now?" he asked. Whisper turned toward the center of the garden, where the mercy bloomed in colors beyond naming. "Now," the dragon said, "the real test begins." The garden stretched before them in impossible beauty. Crystal flowers singing their wordless songs, plants moving with purpose that seemed almost conscious. And at the center, the mercy bloomed with light that made everything else seem dim by comparison. Daniel led his broken crew toward the flower, each step feeling heavier than the last, each breath carrying the weight of everything they had confessed in their testing chambers. Paul walked like a man condemned, his weapons feeling useless against enemies that lived inside his own soul, his scarred hands trembling with emotions he had spent decades learning to suppress. Caroline moved without her diplomatic grace, stripped of the performance that had defined her entire career, vulnerable in ways that terrified her more than any threat she had ever negotiated. Kevin had stopped shaking, but his eyes held a new kind of fear, the fear of a man who had finally seen his own cowardice, and now had to decide what to do about it. Maria walked with quiet strength, her tears dried, but her face transformed by acceptance. The only one among them who had emerged from the test more whole than she had entered. They were almost to the mercy when the garden's entrance exploded. Daniel spun to see armed soldiers pouring through the breach, their weapons raised, their faces hidden behind tactical masks, their movements precise and deadly. At their head walked a man Daniel had hoped never to see again, Commander Richard Hayes of the Earth Defense Initiative, his smile gleaming with triumph that did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Daniel," Hayes said with false warmth that made Daniel's skin crawl, "thank you for doing all the hard work. We have been tracking your signal since you entered the temple, waiting for you to find what we came here to take." Whisper appeared beside Daniel, small but somehow radiating presence that made the armed soldiers hesitate. "You cannot take "The mercy by force," the dragon said, and its mental voice carried to every mind in the garden. "The flower knows the hearts of those who approach. It will burn anyone who comes with impure intent." Hayes laughed, the confident laugh of a man who had never been denied anything he wanted. "Our xenotech teams analyzed your kind centuries ago," he said, pointing at Whisper. "You are biological locks, nothing more. Security measures left by a dead civilization. Kill the Guardian, and the security protocols collapse." He raised his weapon toward the dragon. Daniel moved without thinking, stepping between Hayes and Whisper, his arms spread wide, his body blocking the shot. "You will have to kill me first," he said. Hayes tilted his head with something that might have been amusement or contempt. "You were always the expendable one, Daniel. Did you think volunteering for suicide missions made you brave? Did you think being willing to die made you valuable?" "Thought it made me useful," Daniel replied, "but I was wrong about that, like I was wrong about everything else. Then step aside and be useful now. Let me save humanity the proper way, with force and determination, instead of whatever mystical nonsense this creature is peddling." Daniel did not move. "The test exists for a reason," he said. "The Karath learned what happens when species take the mercy before they are ready. They destroyed themselves. I will not let humanity make the same mistake." "You do not get to make that choice," Hayes snarled. "You are nobody, a failed officer with a failed marriage, and a daughter who probably does not even remember your face." The words hit like physical blows, but Daniel stood firm, because he had already faced the truth about himself and found that it did not destroy him. "Maybe," Daniel said, "but I am also the one the flower chose, and you cannot change that by killing me." Hayes's finger tightened on the bolt trigger. Maria moved then, using the distraction to activate her research equipment's emergency EMP, a pulse designed for disabling alien technology that worked equally well on human weapons. Half of Hayes's soldiers dropped their now useless guns, scrambling for backup weapons, while the other half opened fire. The garden became chaos. Paul charged into the soldiers with nothing but his fists and the desperate strength of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for beyond his own survival. Caroline grabbed the nearest soldier and began talking, her voice cutting through the gunfire, using every skill she had learned in decades of negotiation to plant seeds of doubt and hesitation. Kevin surprised everyone, including himself, diving for the fallen weapons and redistributing them to his teammates with hands that no longer shook. Maria tended to the wounded on both sides, because she could not stop being a healer, even in the middle of a chaos. Firefight. And Daniel faced Hayes alone as the battle raged around them. "You think you understand," Hayes said, circling Daniel like a predator sizing up prey. "You think your little journey of self-discovery makes you worthy of deciding humanity's fate." "I think the mercy decides who is worthy," Daniel replied. "Not me, and not you. The mercy is a machine, a biological construct. It does not have opinions or judgments. It has programming, and programming can be overwritten." Hayes lunged, and Daniel met him, two men grappling at the base of the most powerful creation in the galaxy, while crystal flowers sang songs of sorrow around them. Hayes was stronger and better trained, his hands finding Daniel's throat, squeezing with the cold efficiency of a man who had killed before and felt nothing. "Earth is dying," Hayes hissed. "The colonies are failing. Billions of people are suffering and dying while you play spiritual games with alien relics." Felt his vision darkening. Felt his lungs burning for air that would not come. Felt his body beginning to surrender to the inevitable. "Let go," Whisper's voice said in his mind. "Not of life, but of fear. Not of hope, but of anger. Let go of everything except love." Daniel stopped struggling. He thought of Sophie, the real Sophie waiting on Earth, probably grown now with a life he knew nothing about, a daughter he had abandoned for the stars. He thought about how much he loved her, how much he had always loved her, even when he was too afraid to show it. He let that love fill him, Let it push out the fear and the anger and the desperate need to survive. Something changed. The mercy blazed brighter than it had ever blazed before, a single petal detaching from the flower and drifting down like a leaf in autumn. The petal touched Hayes's hand, and he screamed, releasing Daniel and stumbling backward, clutching his arm as if it had been burned. "What did you do?" Hayes gasped, looking at his hand which showed no physical damage, despite his obvious agony. "The flower knows," Whisper said, appearing beside them. "It has always known. It sees the hearts of all who come near, and your heart is full of nothing but hunger for power." Hayes looked at the mercy with fear, replacing the triumph in his eyes. "You will never be able to touch it," the dragon continued. "Even if you kill everyone here, even if you destroy me, the flower will burn you before you can claim it." The battle around them was ending, Hayes's soldiers surrendering or fleeing as they realized their mission had failed. Paul stood bloodied but standing, having fought not to kill, but to protect for the first time in his violent life. Caroline had talked 3 soldiers into laying down their weapons and questioning everything they had been ordered to do. Kevin had held a defensive position, with courage he had never known he possessed. Maria was already treating the wounded, enemy and friend alike, her healer's oath more important than any war. Hayes looked at Daniel, with something that might have been hatred or might have been envy. "You think you have won," he said, "but Earth still needs the mercy. People are still dying while you stand here congratulating yourself on your purity." "I know," Daniel said, and he meant it, "and I will bring the mercy to Earth, but I will bring it the right way, earned and not stolen, given and not taken." "And who decides if you have earned it?" Whisper moved to stand beside Daniel, small but somehow larger than everything around it. "He already has," the dragon said, "when he opened his heart and let love be stronger than fear, when he stopped fighting to survive and started fighting to protect. The test is complete." Daniel looked at the mercy, at its impossible beauty, at the hope it represented for a species that had almost destroyed itself, trying to reach it. "Then it is time to go home," he said. And the flowers seemed to shine just a little bit brighter in response. The garden grew quiet after the battle, crystal flowers resuming their songs, wounded soldiers being tended by Maria, whose healing hands knew no enemies, and Daniel stood before the mercy at last. Hayes and his remaining soldiers had been restrained, but not harmed, their weapons confiscated. Their mission failed in ways they were only beginning to understand. Daniel looked at the flower that had cost so many species their dreams, that had driven civilizations to madness and war, that bloomed now with colors that seemed to reach directly into his soul. "You may take a cutting," Whisper said. "One piece of the mercy, to carry back to your world. It will grow there, and from it you can cultivate more, enough to heal your people, enough to change your species forever." Daniel reached toward the crystal stem, but paused with his hand hovering above the flower. "What happens to you?" he asked the dragon. Whisper's ancient eyes held something that might have been gratitude or might have been farewell. "I will remain here and wait. Another egg sleeps in another temple on another world. When your species has proven itself worthy, then perhaps the Karath's other gifts can be claimed as well." "And if we fail," Daniel asked, "if we take the mercy and use it wrong?" "Then the flower will wither and die. It cannot survive surrounded by hearts that have turned away from what you learned here today. The mercy requires mercy to live." Daniel nodded, understanding the weight of what he was about to accept. "We will be responsible for tending more than a flower," he said. "We will be responsible for tending ourselves." "Yes," Whisper replied, "and that is the hardest task any species has ever faced, harder than reaching the stars, harder than building great civilizations, harder than anything except opening your heart the way you opened yours." Daniel took the cutting and felt warmth spread through his hands. Ancient and powerful and infinitely gentle. acknowledging his touch. "Thank you," he said to the dragon, "for believing we could be more than we were." Whisper made that chiming laugh one final time. "I did not believe," the dragon said. "I hoped. And hope is what your species has taught me today. If a human can open their heart, then perhaps anyone can." The journey back to the ship was long and quiet. Each member of the crew lost in thoughts about what they had experienced and what it meant for the lives waiting for them back on Earth. Paul walked without his weapons drawn, for the first time since Daniel had known him. His scarred hands empty, but somehow fuller than they had ever been when holding guns. Caroline spoke to Hayes during the walk, not negotiating but listening, trying to understand what had driven him to such desperate measures, planting seeds that might someday grow into redemption. Kevin carried Maria's equipment without complaint, without being asked, discovering that courage did not mean the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Maria hummed as she walked, a song without words, a melody that seemed to harmonize with the alien jungle around them. And Daniel carried the Mercy close to his heart, feeling it pulse with life that matched his own heartbeat. Thinking about Sophie and the conversation he would finally have courage to begin. They left Hayes and his soldiers on Verath Prime, with supplies and a beacon for rescue. Not as enemies, but as people who had been given a chance to face themselves, the way Daniel and his crew had been forced to face themselves. The flight back to Earth took weeks, during which Daniel wrote letters he had been avoiding for decades. Letters to Sophie explaining everything. Letters to Amanda apologizing for things he had been too proud to apologize for. Letters to himself forgiving failures he had carried like stones around his heart. Finally entered Earth's orbit. The entire planet seemed to hold its breath. News of their success had preceded them. The signal from Verath Prime, announcing that humanity had passed the test, that the gift was coming, that everything was about to change. Daniel stood at the viewport, watching the blue marble of home grow larger, feeling tears on his cheeks that he no longer tried to hide. "What do we tell them?" Maria asked, standing beside him. "How do we explain what happened?" "We tell them the truth," Daniel replied. "We tell them that the mercy requires mercy, that the gift can only survive if we become worthy of keeping it, that the hard work has just begun." 3 years later, Daniel stood in a garden on Earth, surrounded by descendants of the mercy that had taken root and spread across the planet. The flowers bloomed in hospitals, healing diseases that had haunted humanity for centuries. They bloomed in homes where the elderly grew young again, and the dying found new life. They bloomed in places of war, teaching enemies that there was another way, that hearts could open if given the chance. Not everyone accepted the gift. Some tried to hoard the flowers. Some tried to weaponize them. Some refused to believe that anything good could come without a price. But each time someone approached the mercy with impure intent, the flowers revealed their hearts, forced them to see themselves clearly, and most who saw themselves chose to change. Sophie stood beside Daniel in that garden, no longer the girl from his test, but a woman grown with her own life and her own wisdom. They had rebuilt their relationship slowly over those 3 years, brick by brick, conversation by conversation, learning to be father and daughter again, after so many years of being strangers. "Do you ever miss it?" Sophie asked, looking up at the stars that were beginning to appear in the evening sky. "Being out there, searching for wonders." Daniel considered the question, thought about Verath Prime's glowing jungles, about Whisper of Dawn breaking, about the moment he had finally opened his heart, and found that it was enough. "No," he said, "I found what I was searching for." Sophie took his hand the way she had when she was small, when he was still her hero, when the stars were just pretty lights instead of destinations. "I am proud of you, Dad," she said, "not for saving humanity, but for coming home." Daniel felt his heart swell with a love he had finally learned to accept. Above them the stars continued their eternal dance, waiting perhaps for other ordinary people brave enough to open their hearts, waiting for humanity to prove that the gift they had been given was not wasted. Somewhere on a distant world, Whisper of Dawn Breaking waited too, ancient eyes watching the sky, hoping that the species it had judged worthy would remain worthy. And in gardens across Earth, mercy bloomed for pure hearts, teaching humanity one flower at a time that the greatest power in the universe was not technology or strength or cleverness. It was love. It had always been love. Daniel squeezed his daughter's hand and smiled as the stars came out, feeling for the first time in his life that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, home at last and ready to stay.